What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the COTACast. I'm Bermudez, and I'm the host of the Craft of the Air podcast, the aviation podcast that really just expands your knowledge. In each and every episode, join me and my guest as we explore the untold world of aviation together. I'm so glad that you guys are tuned in for another episode. You know, we hear a lot of big talk about aviation maintenance pipeline, how it's improving, more students are enrolling, more certificates are being issued, and more awareness about the shortage. And yes, the numbers do show some improvements. The FAA issued over 9,000 new mechanic certificates last year, and that's impressive. But it's actually, when we think about it, it's actually a 4% below the record that we saw in 2023 in aviation maintenance schools. Well, they saw, a 9% jump in enrollment, and that's huge. But, it means more people are saying, I want to be a part of this industry, but here's the kicker. Even with that growth, graduation numbers dropped 5%. So, yeah, students are coming in, but they're not all making it through. And while all of this is happening, demand is still outrunning supply. Right now, commercial aviation alone is operating with about 10% fewer certificated mechanics than it needs. That's this year, 10% short. Add in business aviation, general aviation, and non-certificated techs, that gap feels even wider. And think about it. Oliver Wyndman estimates that the total U.S. aviation maintenance workforce, certificated and non-certificated, is at 433,000 people. But, as fleets grow and as retirements accelerate, that number just doesn't stretch far enough. Even by 2035, projections say that we'll still be short more than 4,200 certified mechanics. So, really, unless something changes, this shortage is going to define the industry for the next decade. When you think about it, now here's the piece that really makes the headlines. The bottleneck in testing. You can't, you can bring in more students into schools, but they don't become mechanics until they pass their orals and their practicals. And that requires a designated mechanic examiner or a DME. And, right now there's only about 254 active DMEs in the country. They administered about 11,600 exams last year. And this was actually 2,000 more than the year before. But, still, the supply doesn't match the demand. And ATEC, the Aviation Technician Education Council, says that we need at least 75 more examiners just to keep up pace. That means that students are graduating, but then they're waiting, waiting weeks, sometimes months, just to even get a test date. And without the certificate, they can't step into the workforce. It's a bottleneck at the worst possible point, the very end of the pipeline. And the FAA is trying to fix this. They're looking at expanding the ODA program, which would allow schools and approved organizations to run tests in-house with their own examiners. That could help, but policies move slow, and the shortage is already here. So you really have to ask yourself, what happens when students are motivated, schools are working hard, but the testing system can't keep pace? We get exactly what we're seeing now, a pipeline that's technically filling, but not nearly fast enough to meet the demand, We get into all of that here in 1 second. First things first, today's episode of the COTACast is brought to you by Craft of the Air, grounded by maintenance delays, overwhelmed by aviation's complexity. At Craft of the Air, we don't just solve problems, we keep you flying. For owners and operators, from scheduled maintenance to AOG emergencies, COTA delivers precision, reliability, and speed. Our certified experts know that every hour your aircraft sits on the ground, it costs you time and money, and we're here to help you get back in the air. For businesses and projects, aviation projects can feel like a maze of regulations, contracts, and technical difficulties. COTA Consulting is your compass. We provide clear and tailored solutions from pre-purchase inspections to project management so your operations run smoother and faster. A&P students, this is all about you. This episode is all about you, but if you're training for your A&P exams, CRAM by COTA is more than a study tool. It's a launch pad led by certified professionals. Our programs break down the toughest materials and giving you the confidence and skills you need to ace your exams and start your career stronger. Craft of the Air isn't just a service, it's your partner, your personal aviation assistant. You're going to have to check out that website, www.craftoftheair.com. Again, that's www.craftoftheair.com today and learn everything COTA can do for you. Craft of the Air, where every project takes flight. All right, so Patrick Griffin is here with me. He's a 28-year-old from Northern Long Island. All right, aviation has been his passion since high school. Pat studied in Barry Tech, so he pursued flying at Farmingdale. He studied at Vaughn College, and he stepped away for a little while. But he came back, and he came back strong through COVID, through side jobs, through 4 semesters of grinding. He earned his associate's degree, and after 2 years of preparation, studying, and pushing through the very testing bottlenecks that we've been talking about, in August of this year, Pat finally got his A&P license. He's a certified aircraft maintenance engineer. I'm going to say that, Pat. And Pat's story is exactly what this report is really pointing to. The passion is there, the students are there, the effort is there, but the road to certification is not getting easier. Patrick, I'm going to bring you in on this. I want to start with this. You lived through the grind. You saw firsthand what it takes just to reach the testing stage. Walk me through the journey. What was it like for you? Vaughn is finally sitting in, this guy's sitting in front of the examiner finally. He was my freshman as a student once, and it's so great to see your journey. But walk me through it, Pat.
Yo, thank you, Brian. Thank you for having me. The grind from starting college to facing the DME was a battle, man. From learning everything I could from my classes to studying and preparing for my exams. I wasn't a great test taker, man. I had to fight and struggle every time I failed. I felt like I let myself and the people around me down. I saw so many people I know that passed, and it made me feel some type of way. Is that, why can't this be me? Each step I took, I got a tad closer, and it felt the end was near. And that's when I knew I had to keep my ambition going. I can't let these mind games get a hold of me, and I knew I was too deep into this. I couldn't back down, and it is such a relief to finally put all that work and get the results.
Yeah, man. And you definitely put it in. Pat was such a hard worker, one of the hardest working students that I've ever had. I'm not saying that because he's on the show. If anybody that is looking to hire a good mechanic, this is this is someone that I would trust with my family on an aircraft. And I'm not saying that. Pat is a really good guy, and his integrity showed outside the classroom. Now, the pipeline is really it's filling, but it's not filling fast enough. And I think to myself, Pat, are we celebrating small wins, or are we falling behind? This is interesting, Pat. We were seeing some progress, right? The FAA issued 9,000 new certificates along with yours last year, but it was actually 4% below the 2023 record. Was actually a 5% drop. So the math really isn't adding up. And mechanics, as we say, it's opened the floodgates, but the water still isn't reaching the reservoir. Patrick, when you were grinding through Vaughn and you later studied for your A&P, did you feel like the system was really helping you along, or did it feel more like you were pushing uphill against those numbers?
Excellent question, Brian. Definitely pushing uphill.
Mm.
During the testing stages, I remember some people use prepware and some people use Dauntless. You heard some students getting certain questions from either app and told you this is the way to go. But to me, I felt like the FAA was not making my exams easier. Furthermore, I would like to include that, I studied for 5-6 hours a day, learning these chapters and going to work in the evening time. This was my life at one point, and it really hit me. I felt like I was going to snap at one point. When the orals and practicals came up, I studied Baker's, I studied Jefferson, and I was still getting questions that the FAA threw at me that no one has ever seen or heard of. And I asked so many people what they studied, and I had to pay for a tutor. I was hitting a brick wall at this point, man. In essence, I wish the school had geared me towards these exams and offered study sessions like how they do with practicals.
Yeah, that's a great take, Pat. And it really took, you know, Pat mentions the hours that he took studying. You know, that's a reality for these students that are preparing for these FAA exams and all of that content that, you know, Pat and all of these students have to go through. You know, there's a shortfall in certified mechanics, and Pat is now certified mechanics, but there's actually a 10% shortfall right now. What does that mean for people that are already in the field? You know, it means pressure. You know, it means longer shifts, fewer breaks, tighter turnarounds. You know, there was a consulting from Oliver Wyndman, Pat, that said the U.S. has about 430 people in 430,000 people in aviation maintenance, certified and non-certified. But that gap is shortening. You know, so many people are retiring. Thank God Pat is coming into the field, but you know, it's not an abstract number. The shortage, lives on the hangar floor, you know, in every, you know, every delayed flight, every crew is, everybody's stretching thin. You know, Patrick, when you're entering this type of work field that I'm describing right now, and it's under pressure, do you feel excited about the opportunities, or do you kind of already feel the weight of being, you know, part of this shrinking supply of mechanics?
I'm glad you brought that up because I have an answer for that, Brian. I'm definitely excited about this opportunity and what lies ahead of my future, man. I can't wait to get my hands dirty and work on the career I've come to love and enjoy, and I feel like I belong in. Finally, I know the aviation industry is in dire need of mechanics, pilots, air traffic controls, which will probably be an ongoing occurrence for years. Maybe the FAA has to change something about the testing to draw more people in. I also want to mention to you, Brian, that if you take a look at the stats, less than 1% of the United States populations are AMPs out of 300 million people in this country. And if you want this number to come up, they got to find a way to reduce the overall stress of these tests.
Man, yeah, I love that, Pat. Yeah, you preaching to the choir here with that info. Less than 1%. Just think about that for a second, people listening and watching. I mean, and it's such a specific skill set that these men and women must have, that Pat must have had to obtain through his studies. You know, yeah, that's a good point, Pat. You know, when you know, right now, when we think about the testing, right, we've got about 254 DMEs, or designated mechanic examiners, and Pat knows what that means very well, across the United States. They gave about 11,600 tests last year, and it was about 2,000 more than the year before, but the demand is way higher. We need about 75 more DMEs than we currently have, and Pat knows firsthand what the challenges that could go into, you know, scheduling for an exam, preparing, going on the same schedule as your DME. Pat, you had to go through this exact gauntlet. How hard was it to not just line up your exams, but did you feel that backlog firsthand?
Definitely. It was a
Mm,
process for me. For starters, finding a good DME, for example, that I connected with who knew my style of test taking. I needed to hear the question more than once to really understand what I was being asked. Next would be scheduling, making sure they had availability each month, which wasn't always easy to get a hold of. There were times where I didn't want to wait to retest. The whole process took me a good year and a half to complete, with many setbacks in between.
yeah, yeah. And when you think about those setbacks, and you think about someone like Pat that is eager to get back into the field and start his career, you know, those setbacks could be critical when he's setting up, you know, the rest of his life and trying to prepare for the next 5 to 10 years, you know. You know, when we think about the reports right now, and you think about who's teaching this new wave of students, you know, who's going to teach the new wave of mechanics, if every skilled tech can make more money at an airline or MRO than, you know, teaching a classroom full of prospective AMPs. You know, it shows that report that we speak about shows that the enrollment is climbing, but the number of instructors isn't really moving. You know, and that's dangerous. You can't just throw students into a classroom without enough skilled teachers there to teach them. Pat knows that firsthand. If you have someone that doesn't really care about what they're teaching, or they're not passionate, or they're not fully understanding the content, they're not going to fully translate that to the students and give them the content they need. You know, Pat, think back at your time at Vaughn. What kind of impact did your instructors have on your journey? And think about the industry, you know, as a whole. Does it do enough to support people teaching the next generation of mechanics?
I would say the impact my professors had on me definitely made me into the person I am today. If we're being honest, I felt like some of my instructors didn't really take the time to address the students. I kind of felt like some just wanted to get through their classes and be out, while some showed that they cared and would go all out to make sure you understood the material. Don't worry, Brian, you're excluded from this list. That's my take on my experience. For the future students coming in, I would say no matter how the circumstances turn out, it all goes based on how bad he or she wants it, because I know a lot of people that have graduated and never pursued the license, and they don't know what they're missing out and the opportunities this career has.
That's so well said. You know, excuse me. That's actually something that I wanted to touch on a later episode, Pat. I'm gonna have to have him come back on, but that's such a great point. You know, especially for the people that are listening and kind of on the fence about their studies, and kind of, you know, maybe not thinking about finishing all the way. You know, all of that comes into it. You know, one of the last things that I really wanted to get your take on, Pat. I know so many people appreciate, you know, your takes on these things, but this one affects us both. You know, it's a big one. Are we building a system that future mechanics can actually survive in, or are we setting mechanics up to, you know, fight an uphill battle as we've been for decades? You know, on paper, that gap that I speak about from a 10% shortfall is now around 6%, but that's in 2030. So, you know, it never really goes away. Even in 2035, the projection in the shortfall, we're still going to be short more than 4,000 mechanics. That means that the industry is permanently behind, you know, useless changes, right? Patrick, you represent the next generation coming in. You just got certificated. When you look at, you know, the next 5 to 10 years, do you see yourself, you know, building a long-term career in this field, or you already, you know, feel like the system's cracks are going to follow you throughout your whole career at this point?
Things for certainty, Brian. I love aviation, and I finally get to be a part of it, and I plan on being in this field forever, because the hunger and passion are truly fascinating, and I don't see myself doing anything else. I want to share my love and desires with other people who feel this way about aviation, and try to get more people involved who have uncertainties about what they want to do when they grow up. I want to be a huge impact, and I want to motivate the next generation. And I don't know where that road will take me, but once I get started and spread my wings, the future is limitless.
Yeah, man. And you know, Pat, you're stepping into this field right now. You know, when you see these headlines about safety incidents, do you feel pressure? You know, like the spotlight's already on you and your peers, or does it kind of motivate you to want to, you know, raise the bar for mechanics coming in behind you?
I definitely do feel the pressure, but safety should be our top priority of our job and career as we handle many lives. Traveling daily aboard airplanes every single day. If we utilize this tool, resources, our experience can only help us all and raise the bar for the field of mechanics.
Yeah. You know, and that's why, you know, having your perspective here, Pat, matters. You know, it's one thing to, you know, read a report, and it's another to, you know, hear it from someone who just lived through the grind of getting certificated. You know, Pat, I really can't thank you enough for joining us and, you know, sharing your journey. You are absolute proof that the passion is still strong. You know, even when the system makes it tough, you know, I think your story says a lot about where we're going and where we need to go. Thank you so much for being on this episode of the COTACast, Pat.
Yo, thank you so much for having me, Brian, and I'm looking forward to being on more episodes, in the future, man.
Thanks, man. We're definitely gonna have Pat on again, and we're looking forward to seeing him and everybody else very soon. And that about wraps it up. But this episode of the COTACast was brought to you by Craft of the Air. If you need expert guidance, aircraft support, or tailored consulting, schedule your free consultation today at www.craftoftheair.com. Again, that's www.craftoftheair.com, and stay ahead of the conversation. Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube with the hashtag COTACast for the latest aviation insights, stories, and updates. And remember, the COTACast is always streaming on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you may listen. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll be seeing you soon.